Lord of the Rings. Is it Lord of the Rings? Rings of Power? It's just Rings of Power. Amazon's Rings of Power, right? That show, honestly, I had my doubts. And considering how much people bashed on it before it even came out, made me even a little more worried. I will say this, though. The most expensive show in the world pulled through. I believe it did. I would definitely recommend it to people, and I think it overall it was good. I enjoyed it. I looked forward to seeing it every week, and really, what pushed it for me was the narrative. Now I know when it comes to lore, they took some liberties, right? Like introducing characters earlier than probably when they show up in the books, and explaining things a bit differently. But I don't mind that. I don't know any movie series or shows that don't really take liberties whenever they do adaptations, and that's fine by me. It was really nice watching Rings of Power because it was a lot more hopeful. It was a lot more, I guess not dark, grim, and edgy, which a lot of things have been of that as of late. And what I really appreciate from Rings of Power is the pacing of the story. I know it felt. I know a lot of people probably that's like their number one complaint, and it felt slow. But to me, Lord of the Rings have always been slow as well. Rings of Power really captured the same type of essence. If you took, this is gonna sound weird, if you took the Hobbit series and you took the Lord of the Rings series and you amalgameshed them, and you know there was some good and bad from each one. That's kind of what Rings of Power is, right? They take the storytelling and kind of the techniques from the Lord of the Rings series, and then they add like the CGI and the spectacle of the Hobbit, and those two things kind of, whether for some people really hated it or really loved it. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. But when I was talking about the pacing of the show, what made it for me is that there's all these different storylines that are going out. I want to say that there are really three main storylines that are happening. Within those storylines, there's probably a little bit of like subsex going on, but each one carries its own weight to it that you felt like you wanted to be part of. Well, yes, you felt like you wanted to be part of. I had to think about that for a second because I was thinking about Gladriel's storyline, and there were times where it was trying to be a little political that I was like, But other than that, uh, you get invested in it, and there's this kind of like, who's this, who's that, as each person, each main character in the story is kind of dropping references or quotes from the original trilogy of movies, and but I do think each character develops in their own way. Now, with each character, there is kind of a focal point that we're following. There is like a main character for each, like three different subplots, and they they're fantastic. They all grow in their own way, and they all have their own difficulties and trifles that they have to deal with. And appreciate that. I love seeing some character growth, and I love seeing how the world reflected around the problems that they had to deal with. And I think that's super important and really good when it comes to the hero's journey, which is kind of a little bit what each character was going through. And when it came to the first act, it's setting up everything. The second act, it kind of plays like this huge mystery box. But whenever you get to the third act, for Gladriel specifically, the storyline gets pretty sped up. And then Gladriel's story gets mixed with Elrond's story, and those two kind of just end up. Elrond's story ends earlier, right? But it just feels like everything gets put to times two. Like I didn't, everything was going at a certain pace, and then next thing I know, things are just happening, and they don't really happen that are told in the books, and that's okay. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it did feel a bit awkward towards the end there when things got sped up. As kind of my gripe. I do like how they portrayed these characters and how they went about them at first when it came to the plot, and to each like Gladriel and the Harfoots and Elrond. It takes something that we've already seen and they put a twist to it. And I appreciate that, and they try to keep true to the characters from before, in the trilogies, and they got to grow, right. But these elves, some of these characters have been alive for hundreds of years already, if not pushing to the thousands. I think it's just hundreds, like a couple hundreds. Yeah, we'll just say that. So it's interesting to see, what does that look like for characters like that. And they don't really explore that. For the most part, they're treated as human, right, with flaws. But there are definitely intricacies that they play among with each other races, and it's interesting that we get to see more of the people in that light. So I think the plot and the character development kind of go hand to hand. There's a lot going on, but really the core of it is the people, and I appreciate that. Now, when it comes to the CGI and how everything looks, it looks beautiful. It looks fantastic. It looks like a movie. Like, it is insane, some of the shots that they got. And credit where credit's due. I mean, they pumped a bunch of money into this thing, and it shows. However, I do know some people were not happy with how much they were showing off the elves, or how little the hobbits were being shown, and they felt like the essence of Tolkien wasn't there. I don't think I'm one to say, right. I think we all know that the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings trilogy, that's all set in there. I mean, there was even a time where Tolkien's son didn't like, he spoke out against the Peter Jackson films and said he didn't like them. He was in support of them, then he wasn't in support of them. So in reality, take it how you might like it. And my wife, being someone who's really into Lord of the Rings and knowing more of that kind of stuff than me, helped me with my homework a bit when it came to watching that kind of stuff. And going into it, I guess, a bit ignorant helped. However, there were still things that I definitely caught myself, but it never ever pulled me out of it. Now, showing off the elves a little more and letting them do their things, I think it wasn't as bad as people may be putting it out. I think the Harfoots, the Hobbits, were fantastic, and they brought a bunch of lore and story to the world. And to me, the elves, they've always been cool. I mean, Legolas, when I was a kid, I thought he was the ultimate badass. So that's just one of those things where I feel like it's the elves definitely look S tier, while everyone else looks like C tier in comparison. So the elves do stand out, but they don't take the spotlight, for a majority of the time. It's maybe anywhere from 30-second to 2-minute intervals that the elves do something cool in a episode that ends up being an hour long, which in the grand scheme of things isn't much. And when I think about it, there's only really, maybe, of the, what was it, 8-10 episodes that played, there's only really like 3 times that the elves do something, which is, in total, if we use my made up math that we're going with now, is like 8 minutes total of a 10-hour show where the elves do something crazy cool. It just feels like some people may overreact when it comes to that kind of stuff. Overall, I think the story lends itself well up into the third act, where things kind of just get sped up. Characters, there's a lot of characters, but they do a great job balancing the characters, where some stories get just a lot more time to marinate than others, or some episodes don't even include some characters, which, as much as you might miss those characters, proves to let the other more kind of complicated, less stereotypical stories play out. And the show looks amazing. The show looks good. The choreographing is great. There's a lot of times where the camera is centered and focused, and you never really have to try to figure out what's going on between cuts. And so overall, yeah, it is a show that I would recommend. It's a show that I enjoyed. I'd probably give Rings of Power, honestly, probably an 8 out of 10. It did something new. It did good. It didn't do anything crazy. I think it really, the third act really hurt me, especially with the reveal of certain characters, and overall, I had a good time with the show. So, with that being said, check it out. Tell me what you thought. If you've already watched it, let me know about your thoughts and opinions, and I'd love to hear from it. Until next time, play nice.